Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're going to be making a circle cutting jig for your router. Well, the whole basis of this project is that we are going to utilize the two existing accessory holes in our base to mount threaded rods that will come out of here, and a pivot base or a pivot block will be able to slide in and out on those two threaded rods in order to change the axis to increase or decrease the radius of our circle in order to make bigger or smaller circles with the router. So we need to make our pivot block, and in order to make that, there's just a couple measurements that we need. For starters, we need the distance between the two holes from the inside edge to the inside edge, and for us that's 2 1/8 inches, and our block needs to be a little wider than what our outside edges of our hole is going to be. So we're going to cut this maple down to 4 inches long. Well, now you can see that we have the grain going along this way, and that's just for strength. I really don't want to put it this way because once we start turning down and cranking down on our set knobs for this jig, I don't want it to be able to snap that grain up this way. So we're going to have the grain going across our rods like this. Our next step is to make it so that this block can sit flush on our work surface while the rod will sit flush on our block. Now we can't do it right here, it's too high. I'll just use a wooden dowel here to show you it's not going to go into that hole. So for that we need to cut a rabbet along the edge here on each side. So we need to get a measurement from the bench surface or the bottom surface of our router plate to the bottom edge of our hole so that our rods will sit flush on our plate. Well, a good way to get that measurement and get an accurate measurement is to use setup blocks and a known flat surface. So I have it here on a 3/4 inch MDF. And I've got a setup block here. We're just gonna lay a 1/4 inch dowel on a setup block and slide it in to see if we have a nice, easy motion to get it into those holes. And we do. And for that, our setup block is telling me that it's 1/2 inch. So what we're going to do is cut away all the material here to leave the edge lip at a 1/2 inch. Sorry, this edge lip at a 1/2 inch, but we also want the material in the middle to coincide with the center to center measurement of 2 1/8. Well, knowing that our block is 4 inches wide and our gap in here is 2 1/8, we can do the math and figure it out that we need a 15/16 of an inch wide rabbet on either side of our maple block. So I'll just draw that line here, and once I get it drawn, we're just going to verify that center measurement of 2 1/8, and it is 2 1/8, and from there we will cut our 1/16 inch deep dado that is 15/16 of an inch wide on our maple board. And just as a test fit, we can see that our threaded rod here, wooden dowel, slides nicely along that rabbet and goes very easily into both holes. So our measurements are correct there, that we have this set up right. Our next measurement that we need to take will depend on the jig hardware that you want to use and whether or not you use a shop-made jig knob or a store-purchased one, as I have right here. We need to put the rod upside down here and just see what's going to give us enough clearance to turn this knob. And in this particular case, I want at least 2 inches. So we're going to need 2 pieces of this blank that we've cut here, and we're going to rip them to 2 inches wide. Well, the next thing we need to do is drill the holes for our jig knob. And as well, we will also need to drill in a threaded insert into the bottom piece. So choose which one is your bottom, choose which one is your top. You want to drill the appropriate hole for your threaded insert, and as well, you'll want to drill an access hole the same diameter as this threaded knob here through your top piece. So let's head over to the drill press and we will drill both of those pieces. In addition to the holes for our mounting hardware, I've also off camera drilled a 3/4 inch diameter recess on the bottom side of our block that will house our threaded insert, because I want this to be slightly recessed. I don't want it to be sticking out and interfering with the motion of our circle jig. There's one more hole to drill, and for that we need to get just a common nail. So our common nail will be our pivoting point that will help us to mark and hold the center or the rotating axis or the pivot point, whatever you want to call it, of our circle. And that will get drilled into our bottom piece from the bottom, and we're going to go about 1/4 inch in from the edge here. We don't need to go all the way through, but we're going to cut the head off of this nail. We're going to grind off our tip here so that it's rounded and not so sharp and kind of dangerous. And we're going to drill our 5/64 hole about 3/4 of the way through our 9/16 blank, and we're going to epoxy this nail or our pivot pin into the bottom of our base. It's time to put in our insert, so just place it in your hole on the bottom side and beat the thing to submission. So the next thing that you want to do is take your jig knob, line up your parts, and basically put your two pieces of your pivot block together. And that would be your pivot block for our jig completed. Well, our next bit of material that we're going to need is going to be our threaded rod. And in this particular instance, because of the size of the holes that are in our router base for our accessories, we're going to be using a 1/4 inch diameter threaded rod. Now, you don't need to use threaded rod as we're not actually utilizing the threads, but the reason I want threaded rod is so that when we tighten down that pivoting block, the threads will help to bite into that maple and give it a little more, what's the word? It's going to make it a lot more secure on that rods to keep it from moving as you're going through the routing process. Well, I checked around, and what I have is a length of 1/4 inch threaded rod with a 1/4-20 thread count, and it's a 3-foot length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it right in half at 18 inches. And that is all the parts for our jig. So our threaded rods will get placed into our holes that are already in our base for our accessory ports, just like this. We'll just make sure it goes all the way in, fully seated in there, and then tighten down your set knob for it here on your base. Your other rod, of course, will be the exact same thing, fitting into the accessory hole, and then the set knob here will be locked down onto your threaded rod. Just make sure you get a good seating. Now you can see how your rods are protruding. Your bottom end with your pivot pin will get placed right here. You can see how nicely those rabbets line up with our threaded rod, and we're just going to place our base on there. Place your top piece just like that in order to sandwich our threaded rods, and we will just get a washer, a 1/4 inch washer, place it on the top of our jig, and then tighten it down. That is our jig. Now how does it work? Well, let me show you. Well, I've got a straight cutter placed in the router, and it really doesn't matter the diameter of this cutter. What matters is how you measure. You will measure from the edge of your cutter to your pin, from the inside edge of your cutter. So the distance between these two will be your radius. But we're just going to set this up. Let's go for a 6-inch circle. So from the edge of the cutter, we're going to measure so that the pivoting pin is right at our 3-inch mark. And once we get that measurement sort of locked in there and we have it all set, we're going to tighten down our set knob on the upper half of the jig, and that will set our pivot distance at 3 inches. So make sure it's good and secure and good and tight so that this pivot block isn't going to move. And now we need to choose our stock to cut. So what you're going to have to do is drill your 5/64 hole in your piece, your final cut piece, to accept your pin for your rotating axis. Well, I have a scrap of MDF here that we're going to be cutting our piece on, and this piece is kind of sacrificial, and you can use it for multiple holes. It's not like it's a one-time thing. So clamp your baseboard, or your backer board, I guess, to the bench so that that's nice and secure. The next thing that we're going to need is some double-sided carpet tape, and you will need some right on the area where your circle will be cut. This is going to keep that little square, or circle rather, that you cut from spinning and going crazy once it actually releases. And we're also going to need some double-sided tape on the section that will not be cut into a circle. So we'll just put another piece there. And once we get this secured in place, you're going to want to put it onto your scrap backer board and give it a good clamp between some quick grips or something for probably about 15 to 30 seconds to help with the adhesion. Once you're happy with that adhesion and you're sure that everything's good, we're just going to line this up and set our jig down so that our pin sits in that 5/64 hole that we drilled, just like that. So let me just explain the process here now. It's a simple one, and the process is we're going to start up this router using the plunge feature. We're going to plunge this down into our stock only about 1/4 inch. Once we get that plunge down, we're going to lock it in place and then carry on to rotate it for a full 360 degrees. At that point then, we will release the plunge it down a little further, lock it in place, spin it another 360 degrees, and we will continue doing that until the circle is cut. And once you're cut all the way through, you can just lift your jig out of the way along with your router, and just like that, you have a perfectly cut circle. And there you have it. A circle cutting jig for your handheld router. Guys, this is a great little jig that is, it's usable with whatever router you have. If you have a trim router, 100% you could use it with it, provided that it has the holes in the base to accept the accessories into it. Any base that has those holes, it's as simple as getting the diameter rod that you need to go into those holes, and then just making your pivot plate to match what it is that you installed for rods. It's a simple jig, but it is extremely effective, extremely versatile, and you could use it for whatever size you want. If you have a 4-foot hole that you need, or a 4-foot round circle that you need for some project, maybe a tabletop, what better way to do it than with your router, and all you need is 2-foot rods instead of the 18-inch ones that I've done here today. even with the 18-inch ones, I still get over a 3-foot circle there just by the positioning of the pins and of the pivoting pin and the bit. It's all in the setup. Guys, it's a great little simple jig that you can throw together in a matter of half an hour and be able to cut whatever size circles you want. The outside edge of these circles is actually, considering this is construction grade plywood, the outer edge of this is extremely clean, the way that the bit cuts it, and the way it's always rotating on that same axis. You get a nice straight square edge that's cleanly cut, provided you're not cutting too much material at once. So don't plunge it too far in. I took 4 passes on that one. I probably could have done it in 3, but to play it safe, we did it with 4. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. Guys, you really got to give this jig a try. If it's something that interests you for your shop, to be able to cut circles of varying distances or varying sizes, in this case anywhere from 6 inches up to 3 feet, this is the way to go. Quick, easy, efficient, and accurate. Guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this week's show. I hope you're going to try it for yourself. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me here again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.